and welcome to Oh What a Lovely Podcast, where popular culture meets the First World War. I'm Angus Wallace, and joining me are Jessica Meyer and Chris Kepshaw. In this episode, we have finally decided to tackle one of the most iconic depictions of the First World War ever put on screen, certainly in Britain, Blackadder Goes Forth. First broadcast on the BBC in 1989, it was the fourth and final series of the much-loved sitcom starring Rowan Atkinson as the ever-cynical Captain Edmund Blackadder and Tony Robinson as his loyal but hopeless sidekick, Private Baldrick. Set on the Western Front, it follows their misadventures alongside the cheerful Lieutenant George, played by Hugh Laurie, and the blustering General Melchett, played by Stephen Fry. It's a show that manages to be both absurdly funny and deeply tragic, ending with the unforgettable final scene where the characters go over the top and the chaos of battle dissolves into a field of poppies. The Guardian called it both hilarious and heartbreaking, while the Telegraph described the ending as a moment of genuine television history. But Blackadder Goes Forth isn't just a great comedy, it has also become part of how the public remembers the First World War. Historian Stephen Badsey calls it a light comedy repeatedly cited as evidence in a major historical debate. The show's picture of bungling generals, doomed soldiers, has become for many the defining image of the war, even though historians have since challenged that version of events. This is perhaps a bit of a different one for us. Instead of digging into something we're unfamiliar with, I think it's safe to say we've probably all watched Blackadder on numerous occasions. And I wonder if, to start us off, I wonder what our relationship with the series is. I watched it as it was released in 1989. I've just looked it up before we started it. It was aired at 9:30 on an evening on BBC One, so it'll have just been after the 9 o'clock news, which was huge. It was bigger than the 10 o'clock news. And I have visions of going, oh, well, I've got to go to bed, and disappearing upstairs to watch it on my portable black and white TV. And it was a water cooler moment the next morning. We would all go to school and discuss Blackadder. And it's the first TV event like that I recall as a child. Oddly, the next one I remember is actually Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, which was the following year. But they're both comedy moments, but they were both those water cooler moments you go into school and go, God, did you see it last night? And you just go over it and over it and over it. So I'm probably the oldest here, so you probably didn't see it as it went out. Jessica, I'm assuming it would be a lot later in the US.
Did it air in the US? I'm not sure it ever did. So my introduction to Blackadder, so my mother was British. Growing up, it meant that we got quite a lot of British culture one way and another. But my introduction to Blackadder was the BBC audio tape of Blackadder III, which I adored. And then we got the videos of the Elizabethan one. I honestly cannot remember when I watched Blackadder Goes Forth for the first time. But most of my exposure to it was, as I suspect is true of an awful lot of people's, in the classroom. First, I saw it when I came over and started studying the First World War, and it must have been in undergraduate. That final lesson of the semester where you wheel in the television and everybody watches something. And then I taught with it myself over the years. But yeah, my introduction to Blackadder was not via this.
I was not watching in 1989, although whilst I was alive in 1989, I wasn't staying up until 9:30 on a Friday night. So it's difficult to say exactly when, because certainly during the mid 90s, they would reshow all of the Blackadders on like BBC Two on a Friday night and the like. So I would definitely have seen them all then, because I remember watching them in secondary school and the like. But I think I probably was also exposed to certainly that final episode of Blackadder Goes Forth in like a GCSE. Well, no, it wasn't GCSE history, because I'd stopped doing history by that point. So I definitely got exposed to it in the classroom at secondary school at some point. I would have seen it then. But equally, whether or not that was before, I would have then seen them all, because I think they went through all of them at various points. You know, they started with the first Blackadder and then all the way through all of the series on a random Friday night also. So yeah, it would have been as a teenager, I think, for me. So yeah, mid-90s at some point.
Considering how influential it is, Emma Hanna's book suggests it was reshown in 1995, which would be for the 50-year Second World War anniversary. I'm not sure it wasn't actually consistently shown before that. And I have just Googled it, so this might be wrong, but apparently it was issued on VHS in 1991, which quite surprised me how quick it came to VHS, if that's correct. At which point, from then on in, you're watching on demand, and that's it, the start of it seeping in and seeping into schools.
Yeah, but so that must facilitate it being, here's the television, here's a video, we're going to watch this.
If it hadn't been reinsured till 1995, it was amazing. It amazed me how much it sunk into our consciousness if there was such a long layover before it was reshown.
I'm just thinking, so 89 would have been the 75th anniversary of the outbreak of the war. You've got another 4 years, and then you've got another anniversary. I don't know if they picked up, if they marked it on the back of that.
Don't recall. I think they were just part of the churn, really.
Yeah, I reckon so. Particularly if, as my memory is right, they just did all of them. Because, yeah, you've got like 4 seasons of content there, or 4 series of content there.
I think they're probably every 2 years, 18 months is a new series. And this is all sort of coming back off the back of that kind of new wave comedy boom with the young ones where, you know, and it's essentially Lord Flashheart is just Rick Mill playing Rick Mill.
Yeah, because my memory is, you know, it used to be on around the same time as you'd have like Bottom would be on, and then it would be Blackadder or vice versa from the same. It was a very kind of BBC Two Thursday or Friday evening, 9 o'clock type deal.
And what struck me, you know, having learned it, taught it as part of the cultural history of the First World War, what struck me watching it this time was the number of jokes that were about the 1980s. There's a joke about mutually assured destruction that is about the Cold War. It is not about the First World War in there.
I think if you went back and watched Ben Elton stand up at that time, where he's doing a lot of shouting and it's very class political based, Blackadder Goes Forth isn't that far away. And obviously Ben Elton's part of the writing team for the last 3 series, isn't he? He's not in he doesn't do actually the first one's not called Blackadder, it's the Blackadder.
Yeah, and all the characterization is a bit weird.
Different, yeah. Baldrick's much smarter. But it struck me as he's very political.
I can't entirely now remember if it was this series or the series beforehand, but there's a joke at one point that Blackadder makes about some news being as unwelcome as being shot through the neck by an arrow and then discovering that there's a gas bill attached to it, which is a pure joke about, you know, utilities under the Thatcher government. It's a purely late 1970s, late 1980s joke.
There's some joke about suffragettes as well, which again I thought was quite political with Flashheart. And I suddenly thought, I'm not sure that would have been in the earlier episodes. It wouldn't quite sit as well, but this is so politicised, a lot of the quips. It worked at a moment in time. And I guess it's at the end of the 80s, so you're getting to the end of that Thatcherist period where the sell-offs have happened and people have started to become very uncomfortable with what the Conservative Party were doing. Why do you think it has become sort of so defining for so many people? Is it because we teach it at school? I'm slightly intrigued now by the fact that it's probably got longer legs than it should really have, considering how old it is.
Yeah, I think there's a chicken and egg thing. I mean, firstly, you know, yeah, having shown it in school means you're always introducing a new generation to it. You know, for a lot of people, particularly during the 90s, I imagine it is their first introduction to or part of their first introduction to the First World War. But it's very slick. You know, it's very polished. It's very easy to watch. It's, you know, it's very funny. And even the jokes we were talking about, the ones about the 1980s, there's enough humour in there that doesn't date that badly. Yeah,
it is very, very funny. I was sitting there giggling away to myself watching this, to my family's amusement. And that's, as someone who's familiar with it, you know, the jokes are worth repeating.
To begin with, it's, you know, it's very well written. It's very well performed. You know, it is all of that cast kind of at the peak of their powers, which means it doesn't date and age badly over time because they are perpetually funny.
There is also the element that these are actors who've gone on to be very familiar, you know, between Fry and Laurie and all the things that those two have gone on to do since then, and Mr. Bean, and these were incredibly familiar faces, not just in the period. You said that they're at the height of their powers. I'm not sure that's actually true. As brilliant as Hugh Laurie is in that, he has gone on to do much better things.
But one could argue they're at the height of their comedy powers. They all move off to do different things from this point onwards. bigger and better, but in different ways.
And it actually sounds like, because I was reading a fair bit of kind of interviews of them about making it, that it sounds like an incredibly stressful thing that they were doing to make, like genuinely quite uncomfortable at times, because it sounds like kind of Richard Curtis and Ben Elton, isn't it, who are writing it? They would turn in a script on like the Monday, and then the cast would pull it to pieces over the week and kind of go, oh yeah, I don't think this is funny, we'll ramp this up. And they'd kind of go backwards and forwards in kind of semi-arguments with each other, to the extent that Ben Elton and Richard Curtis stopped coming to those reads because they found it so upsetting. And then on Thursday, they'd do the read through of the new thing, and then they'd film it on the Friday. Even within the fact, they were all old friends, and like there's a lot of egos and kind of views of comedy crashing into each other over the course of a week, and then they film the outcome of it. So it sounds like it was an incredibly stressful thing to make.
There are actually silos of friends that I hadn't quite realised when I was reading. They're all I thought they're all pals from university. They are all pals from university, but the words all university at the same time. So David Lloyd's there with, he's an earlier generation. Rowan Atkinson, I hadn't realised, is actually older than Fry and Laurie, who are quite a bit later. And then there's the fallout with them over Darling was meant to be called Darling. That's Stephen Fry added that in, and Richard Curtis didn't want it added in. But when the cast kept insisting on it, the repetition brought the humour out, and he sort of ended up relenting. And Stephen Fry apparently knew somebody at school called Darling who hated it.
Yeah, who was called Darling and hated his surname.
But he's funny, and it's such a lame joke that gets all the time, and it's the way he winces every time it gets said, Darling. And
But then right at the end, when you find out his first name, which is, the most anachronistic first name they could have possibly come up with. And it's that moment, that series of moments in that final episode that the joke becomes something else.
Yeah, they kind of add pathos to it repeatedly. And even in that thing, there's it turns out he's looking forward to going home and working at the family business of Pratt and Son. It's just a nicely crafted, extra little funny
opening. It's such a middle class, wanted to be the opening batsman. Or
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting you talk about that writing process, Chris, because the other thing that struck me, it's been a long time since I've watched all 6 episodes consecutively, which I did over the past week. And there's a lot of continuities across. So in the first episode that we meet Bob, and I can't remember, is that episode 2, but when she's in the shower, she's singing Goodbye.
And then that's the name of the final episode.
Which of course it is. And it is, it is a genuine song from the period. So it's interesting that even with that destructive and complicated creative process, there is a really strong narrative arc to the season, weirdly.
There's also clearly a great deal of knowledge about, and we can talk about kind of the understanding of the war. I think I've probably mentioned here before that I've, at times when I used to teach, gave an assignment to my students, which was like a meme assignment, take an aspect of the course and turn it into a funny internet joke, because you can't make jokes about something you don't know anything about. There were some pretty deep cuts, First World War related knowledge and that on display, which, might not necessarily be picked up by an audience that hasn't wasted their lives looking at this stuff, whereas it feels very targeted for us.
So my son's been watching them as well, and I should have asked him, although he knows a bit too much about the First World War, probably.
By osmosis.
At this point of his life.
The funny thing about the episodes with Bob is, if you watch Bob, she is so struggling to keep an absolute poker face. You can tell she's almost over poker facing because she's trying not to laugh. Which is also the episode where we wonderfully have our British soldiers in drag, which is our recurring theme.
Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? But then, of course, it's back to that continuity, because drag comes back in the RAF episode with Rick Mayall, but it's the Germans in drag, which of course is Jason Krauthammel's work on German cross-dressing and the war, particularly among the RFC, which Jason's doing that work right now. So the fact that this was a joke, nearly 40 years ago, that's extraordinary.
It's the fact that because every episode, they aim to basically, zoom in on an aspect of the First World War and then, ridicule and parody it. So yeah, again, you get the RFC, you get musical, you get war artists.
You get poetry, you get hospital culture, you get spy narratives.
Although one of the interesting things is there's not that much poetry in it. You get a little bit of Baldrick's poetry, which again
in the
is
final
very
episode,
funny.
yeah.
And you also get Flashheart's how much he hates this war, like the endless poetry. You kind of would expect there to be more poetry in it, and they kind of step to the side of it.
I wonder, is that our perspective circa 2025? Because what you do get a lot of, you get the poetry, but you also get war diaries, and that in the final episode, all those reminiscent scenes, those are memoirs. Those are, if you sit down and read enough First World War memoirs, British First World War memoirs, that is what they're writing about. So it's mocking the literary output in general, not just the poetry. And I think it's our perspective. We've taken that, the mud, the blood, the endless poetry, and superimposed that on our reading of the culture of the First World War, I think. And actually, for much of the 20th century, non-poetic forms of writing were much, much more part of the public imagination about the war.
I'd love to have talked, spoken or to like the audience when it was coming out in 1989 to see how much.
Oh, we can talk to Angus.
Yeah. So Angus, tell us about your perceptions of it.
Well, curiously, I've just asked my wife, who doesn't really remember it coming out at all.
Because there's stuff in there. You think, how well did this land at the time? What was the kind of the contextual knowledge that allowed these jokes to work in 1989? Because clearly they still work now. It's still funny now. It's still funny enough to entertain three First World War historians now. But we're not necessarily representative of the general public. But the idea that that you can make jokes about First World War artists and they'll land with an audience on Friday night BBC primetime.
It was Thursday night
BBC primetime.
Well, my dad would just put it down as bloody nonsense. That was just rubbish because we didn't watch any of that new wave comedy stuff at all. I mean, the young ones and Legacies said, well, it'd all be on BBC Two anyway. This is BBC One, but it'd be just nonsense. But it was what, hence I had to sneak upstairs to sneakily watch it in my bedroom. But other people's parents did. My father was 10 years older than my mother, so he is from a different generation again. His father fought in the First World War. He never actually left Britain. But he did actually he fought in the trenches of Folkestone.
That sounds like the best way to fight in the First World War.
He volunteered on 14th of December 1914 and never left the country.
Yeah, that sounds like the safest way to be in the First World War.
Yeah, exactly.
Just commute from home.
But what I'd be intrigued by is would be to look at the scheduling of programmes that had aired in the last 10 years. And what I do remember as a child, the World at War seemingly being on hard repeat, but I don't recall the Great War being on hard repeat, because essentially it wouldn't be, because it was black and white. So you didn't watch black and white stuff. That was yesterday's news. Whereas the World at War being in colour seemed something that said, and it was always, I remember being on a Sunday night.
One of the other things I want to flag up about it, again, about the process of them making it, because apparently they were also very, very concerned when they were making it that there'd be a massive backlash, that they're making light of the war and they're mocking the war.
Well, this is coming after Monocle Mutiny, where there was the big backlash.
Yes. But it's also, coming after Oh, What a Lovely War, where, it's not like that isn't mocking the war either. But I think the difference that they had in their mind is that they were mocking soldiers rather than mocking generals, whether or not there is a difference between, the target of comedy in those circumstances. And I seem to remember various interviews with Tony Robinson and Rowan Atkinson, where, one of the reasons why everybody dies at the end, partly is because it's the First World War and everybody has to die at the end, but is to avoid the implication that, they have just made light of it and they haven't kind of really grappled with the gravity of the situation. The way that you do that is that they die at the end. But then everybody always dies at the end of a Blackadder series. But I do think it's interesting that there is there was a perceived difference between mocking someone like Haig, who is apparently a justifiable target for satire and comedy, and mocking the Tommy, like the heroic soldier.
How low does that go? Because yes, okay, so George is a silly ass, and there's the class mockery around him and around Baldric, but that's very much in a very old music hall tradition, just to pick up on the cross-dressing episode of mockery. Whereas as military officers, the mockery is aimed at mainly at Melchett and Darling, right? And mocking the ADC is in a grand military tradition. As someone who's read an awful lot of trench journals, we've seen, and that was true, in so many of the things we've seen, the red caps and the ADCs, the brass hats are open to mockery. So the fact that might be perceived differently by 1989 is really quite interesting, and says something about changing class relations, I think, because that is the center of the comedy here, right? It's class mockery. There's the intense mockery of the public school tradition is there throughout, particularly around George and Melchett. I think the shift to saying that we can consider Darling and Melchett part of the ranks of the Tommies circa 1989 says something about class relations and the understanding of the military, possibly. Or maybe I'm just thinking too much about military masculinities at the moment.
The humour is the British Army almost at war itself. You've got the everyman in the trench, and we can include George in that because he's, badly going to give it one to the bush. But actually, all the time, they're at conflict with Melchett, who's right behind them, 30 miles right behind them. That's the humour, that those pressure, those tensions between the Tommy who's going to get killed and those chateau generals who are not.
And then you kind of have like Haig even further behind, sweeping people around with his dustpan and brush. And at the centre of it, you have Blackadder, who is the only sane man in an insane situation.
And I wonder if the problem with it all is that every time what they do is they set up something with sort of a historical, if I say fact or a historical, and then they go off. Then they sort of, when you're watching, go, oh, that's true. Oh, but as it disappears off into hyperbole of, it would be easier to shoot 50,000 men a week. Oh, that's quite funny, but we didn't really lose that many people. But we were losing, 4,000 men a week. But you've kind of shot it off into the atmosphere of how massive this is to make a funny point. And that's perhaps where our stereotypes go wrong.
We're working our way slowly around to Govegate, aren't we here? Do we need to explain to our audience what Govegate is? I'm sure we've done it before, haven't we?
There's a spectre haunting First World War studies.
And this is where we possibly need to go back and get Katrina and Marie back on. But it becomes about, it's written as a comedy show, as entertainment, as a way of making people laugh on a Thursday night that is used as a teaching tool. And then Govegate is the critique of it as a teaching tool. Comedy, you've got to have those exaggerations, right? It's what makes it funny. It's moving General Haig's drinks cabinet closer to Berlin. It's a great joke because it's not what Haig was trying to do, because it's not the history.
But is there something odd about this Blackadder if we think of the previous ones, where suddenly Edmund Blackadder is no longer power hungry? So you have a whole tonal shift in the series as well, adding to sort of a certain authenticity. So rather than him wanting to be Melchett or go up the ladder, he doesn't. At no point does he ever sort of want to be a staff officer, which might get him into that chateau. Eating off China rather than being sort of juxtaposed in the trench, eating his ratto van. Which forces this sort of tonal shift, which again, he just wants to survive, which adds a sort of a certain realism to it. Oh, I bet they just wanted to survive. They were just there to, and it drops us in. It's a completely different.
Yeah, he's also not a volunteer or kind of like the Kitchener New Wave. He's an old professional soldier because he joined up when there were battles in the Empire against people who couldn't possibly hope to defend themselves, where he saves the life of Douglas Haig.
I mean, there's a lot of mocking, post-imperial mockery going on in those final couple of episodes, isn't there? On the Sharpened Mango.
I don't think Baldrick's a conscript. I think they're all volunteers.
They're all volunteers, yeah.
Which is interesting as well, that they're not men who have been pressed into service, as it were. They're all volunteers.
Alana Bettel, when she was writing about conscripts, argues that, at the time she was writing 20 years ago, the conscript had been was a forgotten element of the First World War. And I think that's true, and that's partly, we're back to memoirs again. There's a construction. Very few people write a memoir of, I didn't want to go to war, but I was forced to. Yeah. I
think Bettel points out there's 4 books written by non-conscripts, memoirs. It's not a lot.
And it's a bit like Ian Isherwood's point about POWs, of they want to write celebrating that they've been stuck in a prisoner of war camp for X number of years. It's hardly the heroic narrative of war that publishers want to publish. So in that sense, what is available to be remembered and then riffed off as a joke, I wonder how different it is now from the way it was in 1989. As you say, this is after the Great War. This is after that 1960s burst of interest in the war and people writing down their memoirs, but also prior to perhaps the 1990s boom around, that sort of fed off the back of Regeneration, where people started to do more research and it became a subject of research.
Yeah, you've got the Second World War launches it all back, and Regeneration comes out or possibly after the back of that 50-year anniversary, where there's an awareness that people are dying out again.
It's interesting as well how, whilst there's been things, horrible histories have done loads and loads of stuff about the First World War, and there was briefly a Channel 4 show which had some of the people from Peep, the In-Betweeners in it, called White Feathers or something like that. It was about conscientious objectors. But it feels a little bit like Blackadder killed the First World War for comedy, because everything exists in comparison to Blackadder, and they've already been very funny about it. But I also wonder, to the extent that, in a post-Gove world, whether or not the First World War has become kind of re-sanctified, and there were harder barriers for comedy.
I'm not sure it's a post-Gove world. The re-sanctification was happening before then.
Because even just thinking about some of the press about like various computer games that came out during the centenary, and a lot of the kind of the conversations about whether or not that were kind of played out in various parts of the press, including like national newspapers, about whether or not a computer game about the First World War was disrespectful. I think, well, we're living in a post-Blackadder world. Blackadder was disrespectful in a comedic sense, but was also kind of being respectful at the same time. But that idea that actually, oh, no, you can't do that with this, feels very odd after 1989.
But I think there's something about the death of the last veterans. At least in 1989, there were still some around who could answer back.
Yeah, I'd have loved to have known what they thought about Blackadder.
Wouldn't it have been brilliant? What was the response of First World War ex-servicemen? Soldiers' humour is unbelievably black and vulgar and disrespectful.
And there's not a huge leap between Blackadder and like the Wipers Times. They exist within the same wheelhouse.
So I do wonder if that's the re-sanctification moment. And the death of Harry Patch, I remember, is this moment slightly before, because when did Harry Patch die? I can't remember, but so it was slightly before the centenary and before Gove's Lovey's letter and the Lovey letter. Just this moment of absolute reification of the First World War ex-servicemen, and the Tommy in particular. So I think that might have been the turning point. I think it's hard to be... It feels like punching down when you're laughing at the dead, perhaps.
Yeah. So in that slightly odd situation where Blackadder Goes Forth probably couldn't be made now.
Yeah, I don't think it could. But you might be able to make a Falklands War comedy.
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Oh, I've been controversial. Okay.
I mean, I could very much see how it could be very, very funny. I don't know if you'd get away with it, simply because there's that.
No, I don't. I think there'd be a strong veteran movement against it.
Yeah, and there's that kind of phrase which is, I don't know how true it is that, more Falklands veterans have died from suicide than they did in the conflict, the PTSD thing, which I'm told is exactly the same as shell shock.
And yet, the ability to make fun of the lunacy. I mean,
but it would work for the Gulf War.
It would work for the Gulf War,
which the Gulf War, coming off the back of it, that first Gulf War one, the British Army were actually embracing Blackadder and calling bases after characters from Blackadder.
Yeah, and there's also certainly in the lead up to the first Gulf War and some of the bits in the beginning, there's a great deal of just sitting around not doing anything, which is a big part of Blackadder. It's a one room show to an extent. Weirdly, well, I say not necessarily weirdly because it's almost probably intentional, but there's a journey's end aspect to the framing and the setting of Blackadder.
Well, yes, there is. It's very journey's
so you
end.
Could do a Gulf War where you're just sitting around waiting for nothing to happen.
Can I wrench us around to a slightly different topic on the basis of discussing whether shell shock is PTSD or not? How they talk about madness, they don't talk about shell shock, they don't talk about psychological trauma, but they do have a field hospital. Oh my God, the field hospital! And they had a female nurse that close to the front line.
I forgot. Did they actually call that a field hospital? That hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
At least 3 times at the end of the episode.
Because it's a very well. I missed that, but it's a very well appointed hospital. So I assumed it was a long way away.
Even if it was, it would have been a base hospital. Field hospitals exist for about first 6 months of the war. And then they become casualty clearing stations. And they're field hospitals again by the Second World War. But the First World War is an anomaly, and they don't have field hospitals.
But this is where I sometimes think when they go to great pains in various articles to point out how much effort that they put into researching the First War. And I think they probably bought a lot of books on the First World War, read the first chapter which summed up the book, and didn't always go very much further.
But I think there's also a question, and this is an academic thing, of what we mean when we talk about research. And I've had this conversation with a lot of colleagues actually who want to work with the media, and they say, "Oh, but their researcher calls me up and wants me to summarize what I've done," and they say that's doing research. I say, yes, that is them going and finding out information from the best source that they can access. It's not going into archives and finding the primary source material. It's reading the secondary. It's the equivalent of reading the secondary literature. It's why we write history books, so that people read them as their own research to get the knowledge. It's 1 degree removed by what we do. It is still research. So yeah, I can believe they went out and read the books at the time. And I say this because I wrote a book where nobody had written about this change in language around the field hospital at the time that I published that book. So they wouldn't have necessarily had access to that research, which is why there are bits that, things like German cross-dressing in the German Air Force, the fact that I don't think there is anything been written on that, except maybe a couple there were some German memoirs. So someone had actually read some primary sources there, presumably.
So, a point I did pick up on, none of them, I don't think any of them did history as undergraduates. But this was going to get me to, is it Six, the musical about Henry VIII's wives? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
No.
I have not, but I know people who absolutely love it.
I have heard most of the songs because I have a 14-year-old daughter.
And I think in the panoply of short tunes, I think they're fairly average, really. But anyway, I believe that's written by history undergraduates, but it has a point. And when you get to the end of it, I sat through it all, glazed through it all, got to the end, I thought, oh, you've got a point. You're clearly someone who has understood the messaging and pulled things together, and there is more than just show tunes here. And I'm not sure you can really say that for Blackadder, because there is not that deep understanding of shifts and changes and things that you might have been taught if you'd turned up as an undergraduate and done at least a term on the First World War and had some of the greater themes rammed into you. They're not there.
Except it is a good teaching tool, I think. It's a question of what questions you're asking, right? Are you asking, what are the origins of the First World War? What are Allied relationships in the First World War? What's the role of the Flying Corps? Or how did medical care change in the First World War? Questions that, in one way or another, how do people enlist in the First World War? These are all questions that we've asked as historians, right? But if you're asking a question, it comes back to class, which is this. It is a 1980s obsession, but it is also a First World War obsession. And if you are asking about class relations in the British military in the First World War, I think actually there is quite a lot there. So it's about, if you're going to use it as a teaching tool, I do think it's useful. You have to ask the right questions, which is about what history is doing anyway,
And when I got shown it, it was very much in the Baldric's, an Archduke shot on ostrich because he was hungry, kind of explanation of the outbreak of the First World War. And that's what we were shown it for. This is how you can understand why the First World War happened as a use of farce to do it. So it's not quite Christopher Clark, but as a way of framing the ridiculousness of it by leaning into the ridiculousness
and
of
and
it.
the same is true about who were the men who fought in the First World War. Well, of course they're caricatures, because that's what comedy does. But like any good myth, to go back to Samuel Hines' definition of myth, right? It's rooted in something, and to that extent, the defense of cultural history. It works as a source.
Well, perhaps the genius of Blackadder is that those stereotypes are so strong and so well done that instantly the viewer knows what's going on. So there's no you sometimes watch your first episode of something and you have to figure out who are the people. Not in Blackadder. You're straight in with exactly who the stereotypes. You know how they're going to perform, and you're off and running straight away.
I've also just remembered that. So when I was doing my GCSEs, because I dropped history by then, and was doing drama for one of our final projects, my small group did the final episode of Blackadder Goes Forth, because I had the book of the scripts to do it. And it is an interesting thing to kind of attempt to perform, because, Rowan Atkinson, Hugh Laurie are many times funnier than I was as a 16-year-old. But the script is so well written that you don't have to do any effort to make the jokes work, or kind of to get the thing across. But everybody in the audience had seen it as well. Everybody had watched Blackadder. So it was not quite at that stage of, when sometimes you go to, if like a musical comes out and you go to the cinema and you watch it for like a sing-along version, but you could sit and just quote along with Blackadder because it's so memorable, and because the jokes work so well, and because it is embedded enough in the history that it makes sense.
The pun in the final scene, which I think is brilliant, but I'd be intrigued to know if you showed it to a load of kids now, if they'd get it, is... so the shelling stops and he says, "Oh, we've survived the war. Clearly it's over." And Dalek says, "Yes, I'll be able to tell everyone I survived the war 1914, 1917. And there's a moment when you go, "That's wrong." "Oh, very good. That's very, very funny." But I wonder now if you show people that go, "And that it finishes the next year." Oh, I didn't realise.
Yeah, I did.
Lost on people.
On Twitter. When the after the last lockdown, I made a little historical meme that was that scene, which is we've survived the great COVID pandemic, 2020 to 2021, and as that kind of joke that actually this is going to be going on for a while. A lot of people online find it either very funny or very upsetting. that idea of kind of like the short-sightedness of trying to draw these lines, but yeah, that might be one of my favourite jokes in the whole series, because it is so funny that actually it's like, "Oh, guys, I'm so sorry."
But it does also point to the extent to which this is a very, very, very British bit of culture.
Yes.
Because that joke
doesn't work in the Great War theory.
Yeah, for Ireland, that's not going to work.
Oh.
Right?
Well, I do wonder, I suppose at the start, is there something that's so iconic for other nations that sort of frame their First World War around in 8 episodes of 3 hours or whatever it is, 8 hours of TV? Because it is all consuming in Britain and the memory of the First World War. Considering how much we frame our First World War experience about the Somme, this is after the Somme.
It's Passchendaele, which is that's a really interesting bit of if you imagine it as Passchendaele, then that was the overriding memory for a lot of men up to I can't remember when the Somme takes over. It's not before 1929, I don't think, and I'm not sure it's even then.
The actual timeline of the series is never clear because at one point the phone rings and Blackadder makes a joke about Somme baths, snow running, jumping or piddling in the shallow end. So it's not entirely clear when the various episodes are taking place. I mean, the setting never changes. And by the end it is at Passchendaele that they are. But there is a suggestion that they might have been on the Somme for one of the episodes.
I bet if you polled people, though, and say, what battle does they'll go, it's the Somme. Even though it's perfectly clear at the end it can't be, they'll go, it's the Somme. Well, is there any other battle?
Yes. Well, this is Bill Philpott's 1st of July syndrome, where the first day the Somme has come to inhabit the entirety of the war in the minds of the British public.
Comes back to Blackadder's, you might as well just shoot 50,000 people a week.
Every day.
Yeah.
Which, isn't even the right number.
The right number.
But it's been very selective on the day he's pointing to. Do we have favourite lines?
Oh, I mean, I do have... I quote Blackadder. Again, it's a thing of a certain age. I don't necessarily know if kind of even the generation of First World War historians maybe below us or below me and would be so able to quote Blackadder in the way that we can. But I quote just in conversations with friends who aren't even First World War historians, I quote Blackadder quite a lot, and we all do because it's like quoting The Simpsons because it's funny.
I mean, I called my cultural history of war module Mud, Blood and Poetry, so I'm going to have to go with Rick Mayall's line. It's a summary of the cultural historian of First World War life, isn't it?
And it's in that last final scene that I quite like. It's just as they're leaving the dugout. Blackadder turns to George, says, don't forget your stick, Lieutenant. And he said, I wouldn't want to face the machine gun without this. Picks up his swagger stick. It's ridiculous. It's wonderful.
It's slightly more seriously, though, as a historian of masculinity in the war, Hugh Laurie saying I'm scared is just a perfect moment.
Yeah, well, it is not a situation comedy. It's tragedy rather than comedy. It's the whole series pretending to be a situation comedy.
Yeah,
people were shot for shooting things. All the way through there is this element of tragic truth, sort of hidden.
Final line from Blackadder of "Good luck, everybody," which is possibly the only genuine thing that Blackadder says in the entire series and means it. Because he's run out of ways of getting out of this.
Yeah. I mean, the audience at the time, and this is the other, the complicated thing about using it as a teaching tool, particularly if you only use that final episode. I don't know if this was true of you, Angus, that when you watched it, you would have watched the first, if not the first series, then certainly the Elizabethans and the Georgians. You know how those series ends. You know that everybody dies. I wonder how much our students get that sort of complex anticipation that then the decision to go to the poppies carries an extra punch because it's diverting from the tradition.
But it's also not the comedic ending. Even if it didn't go to the poppies, which adds that, if it just sort of faded out of them going over the top, there is no comedy in that ending. Which, is it series 1 where they all lie on the back and wave their legs in the air and die? There's a comedic. Yeah. There is no comedy. They
were very, very worried about the ending when they were making it because when they kept going, they did the filming of them going over the top. I think this is from an interview with Tony Robinson, and they were all falling down. A lot of the the setting, the landscape was kind of made of polystyrene, and like the characters were bouncing when they fell down, and it's like, it looks ridiculous. We're going to get absolutely killed for doing this. We have to find a way of making this work, because otherwise the ending's going to look terrible. And it's just almost a kind of a slightly kind of Jaws-esque moment where the shark doesn't work, so you do something else. And like the footage didn't work, so they did something else, and it worked very, very well. And they just found some stock footage and some stock Birdsong, and they put it over the top.
But I was just looking at the recording date. So they recorded Goodbye on the 1st of October 1989. It airs a month later. They're not spending a lot of money on single camera shoots and locations and moving stuff around. These are high paced, bang it out in a day, move on, relatively low cost. I mean, television's expensive, but it will be low cost, even though it's on at 9:30 on a primetime TV, which would be a significant budget. So, you know, it was interesting how people refer to it going at the sepia look and this, that and the other. It amuses me when people talk about the colour, because it'll have been shot on video. So the colour's pretty much what the colour is. So there is no colouring as we think of colouring now on film and TV. It comes 2000, after 2000. The colouring is essentially the drab uniforms that they're all wearing. And I tend to think people have overthought the idea of what the colour of it all looks like, because I kept picking up on that when I was reading up, which amused me. It was a great last scene. I'm not sure we could probably keep going on for Blackadder for a long time.
Well, I think ending on the last scene probably makes sense.
To, treat it with the reverence which a commodity show deserves.
I tell you what, I did. Sorry, this is a complete ridiculousness. I wonder, did you recall the end of Birdsong where people complained it was the wrong birds tweeting at the end of Birdsong? Do you remember this when it came out on the TV?
I do remember this when it came out. I do. Or at the very least, I remember hearing about it.
There was a big stink, because that bird didn't arrive at that part of France until 1926 or something like that. It did occur to me, I wonder what the bird is, and if someone has figured out if it's...
got to be a skylark, hasn't it?
Who knows? The sound department just might well have just gone, that's a bird, that's fine. Because
that's exactly what they did.
The BBC sound effects archive on its record just said bird tweeting. Yeah, that'd be fine. Boom.
Yeah, I think they just found some stock footage or some stock
just
sound.
Chucked it all in.
Yeah.
They haven't got long. The people are not as sniffy, but there's that big stink about Birdsong and the wrong birds.
God, I can't even imagine caring about that.
Well, it was a big stink at the time. Unusually, we know what we're doing next time out for our Christmas episode, I think, don't we, Chris?
I remember us discussing a Christmas episode, but I can't remember what it was.
I think we're having Anne-Marie back on.
Anne-Marie's going to come back on and talk about Robert Graves.
That's right.
But can I set us an assignment for the new year, rather than trying to wait until it comes out on streaming, which is to go see the choir or the choral or whatever it is? Yeah, the choral.
I'm not sure what the release date is actually for that, but I assume it's before Christmas.
No, I know. So it's premiering. I put my name into a Facebook competition, which I didn't win. It's premiering next week in Bradford, part of the Bradford City of Culture. And I'm gutted that I'm missing this. Having missed the premiere of Riot Women, which took place down the hill from me in Hebden Bridge, I'm not going to make this either because I didn't get tickets. Actually, it's this week, possibly.
So this is the film about a choir in some Yorkshire town, West Yorkshire. Let's be clear about that. They're all hamming up their Yorkshire accents. They've all gone full Sean Bean.
Ray Fiennes. It's an amazing cast, and it's going to pick up on all sorts of Winifred Holtby references. I have a horrible feeling, which I'm really looking forward to, or not a horrible feeling, a good feeling about. So if we can go watch it separately in the cinema and then maybe do our New Year episode on it.
Yeah, I'll see if it's getting released down here.
Rather than hanging around and trying to wait for it to come out on a streaming service. Which is basically so that I can drag my family along to the cinema when it comes to Hebden Bridge Picture House.
Oddly, if I'd already, flagged that with my family with mine are grown. So for listeners, we have two sets of homework. They have the choral, of which the trailer is certainly available now. And also Anne-Marie we're going to discuss the short story.
I don't even know the title, but it's by Robert Graves.
Yes, it's called The Christmas Truce by Robert Graves in Anne-Marie's book, The Penguin Book of First World War Stories.
Lovely.
Fabulous.
So that's our Christmas episode. Cool, very good. Well, I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Indeed.
Yes, for Christmas with my own house.
Yeah.
It's a spin-off.
Right. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Good luck, everyone.
Bye.